I've been reading a couple of books
Ah,
about him also.
oh, that's all right. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want you to meet the morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. It's a wonderful conversation there. Hey, Karen. Hey, Chaparral. Hey, Andre. Hey, Linear Bob. Hey, all my people over there sending you all so much love. So much love. Tremendous conversation that we have. And of course, the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. You can also tell people about one of 5 or 6 radio stations in the United States that is independent and progressive. AM 950 Radio is one of them. Please tell everybody about it. And when you go to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and then click the bell so that whenever we go live, you can hear from us. We have been talking in the first hour and in this about, first, we talked about Julian Assange and where that case is. For the record, he has not been offered a plea deal by the government. So let's be very clear on that. And his life is at risk, and we are still praying and fighting for his freedom. He needs our support. What is he guilty of? We don't know. They won't let us know what the charges are, but we do know that he's guilty of exposing war crimes. We know that. We know that. And that's our money that's being used to kill people and abuse people and put our service persons in harm's way when they're put overseas, engendering all of this ill will all over the place and at home. So there's a lot going on. So we were talking about that, but we were also talking about the growing uncommitted movement. AM 950 Radio, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that in Minneapolis, it was 19% of you. Well, in just a few weeks' time, nearly 20%. Almost 1 in 5 voters said, I'm uncommitted. And if more of you had known about the campaign, only heaven knows where those numbers would be. Only heaven knows where the numbers would have been in Michigan. It took them 21 days to organize 101,000 people, although you only thought, Josh Feinstein, that you said 10,000 is the goal. You multiplied that by a factor of 10. Something is going on out here, and the corporate media want to ignore it. And more than that, the Democratic Party wants to ignore it. I will give the Republicans this: they're not ignoring their movement. Even though they might not like Donald Trump, they're going with it. But we tamp down Bernie. All of the exciting people, we don't want to talk to AOC. Ilhan Omar, who is she? Where does she come from? Cori Bush, we're not, she's an incumbent. We're not trying to give her any money. We're trying to get somebody else to get her out of there. Because she's just a little bit too much. Jabal Bowman, they're just a little bit too much. The energy of the party is being sucked out. And we're ignoring what's really happening on the ground. In 1983, for example, when Harold Washington ran for mayor, no one gave him a chance. And he didn't give himself a chance. He didn't want to run. He said to Reverend Jackson and some other leaders in Chicago, look, you raise $100,000 for me and register 50,000 people. I'll think about it. Well, they registered more than 100,000 people and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thank you, Ed Gardner of Soft Sheen, and John Johnson, and George Johnson, and so many others, and Tom Lewis of Southside Bank, and on and on and on. So much so, there was something going on in the streets, Joshua Feinstein and Sheila Garland and Dwight McKee. So the night of the election, all of the news anchors were caught by their unawares. They could not believe what was happening, even though he was running against a man who was in a psychiatric ward, sadly. That's right. Bernie Epton was very sick, and you knew that he was mentally ill, but he almost became mayor. Such was the fear of a black mayor in Chicago. So we need to be honest about what's happening here. Now the White House is saying that they are going to actively push back against RFK and Cornel West and the third party candidates instead of trying to bring them in. They're still running after the people we lost in the 60s when you signed all the civil rights legislation. You're still running after the Reagan Democrats. I mean, are you serious? So we need to talk about this because this is very, very, very real. And I don't know if they really take this uncommitted group as seriously as they should. Sheila Garland of the Poor People's Campaign of Illinois, Dwight McKee, senior advisor to Cornel West in his presidential quest. He's from the National Action Network and Operation Push and Rainbow Push. dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project. But let me start with you, Joshua Feinstein, Jewish Voice for Peace Action in Michigan, because everybody, when we saw what you did in Michigan, everybody ran to Michigan, Sheila, and said, okay, what did you have to do it? You started getting calls from all over the country. And people, they're still counting the uncommitteds here in Chicago. We just had our election on Tuesday, right, Sheila? I mean, they're just, because they're there. When you hear about it, they're there. I'm wondering, though, Josh, if they're really, with the White House actively pushing back against third party, I'm wondering if they're hearing anything.
So that's a good point. First, pivot a bit and bring you just sort of up to date about the Uncommitted movement. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Is there
Oh,
anything?
absolutely.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. First of all, Monday, we kicked off our national Uncommitted campaign. The leaders of it, we called a press conference. We had the press there. It was a half-hour Zoom call. And the leaders of the movement, I was on the call, they said, we are going national. Our focus right now for the next 2 weeks is Wisconsin, but this is officially a national movement. And as part of JVP Action, we obviously endorse it, and we're now their partners. Let's just bring you up to speed that we are not stopping. We started something, and this is going national. In terms of what that means, either from a third party or whether the White House is listening, I want to pivot to the usual question that everyone keeps on asking us and saying, well, aren't you giving the election to Trump? Aren't you giving and we're saying, no, we are having everyone vote uncommitted so to stop Joe Biden from giving the election to Trump. That is what this movement is about. Now, getting to the idea of the third party itself, in JVP Action, we are more focusing actually in the down ballot because that's where we live. That's where things happen, whether you are in or from Flint or you're in Chicago. That's where life happens. And so we're saying, hey, Joe, stop the genocide if you want to get reelected. But in the meantime, where our focus is on a day-to-day is the 13th district in Michigan, the 12th district in Michigan, the 4th district in Michigan. This is where our focus goes, and city council streets. The idea being is that we've seen we're not going to be able to generate a third party out of the blue. And with respect to RFK, and again, a lot of respect to Cornel West and Dwight, it's very hard to actually say this is going to be a third party or whether there's the no labels. Where we are saying is going ground up is let's start to focus on candidates, whether they are going under a Democratic ticket or Republican ticket, independent or a new ticket. The idea is getting our people in a voting bloc coalition at the down ballot area so we can begin to take back our power. So that, and it's interesting because I know you were asking about just third party in general, but that's how we're approaching it, at least from a JVP Action point of view.
Would you say this is on the local, county, state, and then the federal levels? Because,
Yes.
presidency is decided in the states. Many of us now, as we're having all of these contested elections, we're beginning to see, your state representative has a lot of juice, a lot of power.
Very much so. It's interesting because I always think of that thing that we say that if we're talking about the White House, actually the road to the White House goes through Michigan. And I think we proved that a couple of weeks back. But yes, I am referring to the down ballot. And to a little pivot on the conversation in terms of the pre-read of coming up to the show about things that are going on. But I believe that that's the areas where we can actually have direct success and make direct impact coming up to November, is by going towards those council seats, the state legislative seats. And then again, in Michigan, we have a number of actual U.S. House representative seats coming up and a Senate seat. So that's essentially where the focus is right now. I hope that makes sense, Santita.
No, it does. It does make sense. I mean, I'm looking at the headlines, and with increasing alarm, among the headlines, what to do about the third parties, where actually the Democrats are targeting them for destruction. But they're also trying to figure out how to shrink the crowds at Biden events.
Yes.
And vet the people who go there, Sheila. I'm like, Dwight, how do you do that? This is a campaign rally. You want a lot of people there. But they're so afraid of, the third party. 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 the dissent in the crowd. And then you've got Nancy Pelosi calling dissenters, people who are aligning ourselves with Putin. I mean, for goodness sake.
Very disappointing, by the way. And I know she's always done what, quote, she has to do to survive and thrive politically. But the last couple of weeks, the people I don't get along with say they're not surprised. But I'll tell you, she's really surprised me, and not in a positive way, because I've always admired her tenacity. I've always admired her ability to navigate and actually get things done. But I think someone from APAC called her up and said, "Look, listen, Nancy, you gotta," and because the things that come out of her mouth are very, very surprising to me. Very surprising.
I'm not surprised. Like her, respect her, but I'm clear on her politics, and that's just it. Sheila?
Yeah, well, thanks, Joshua. That's really understanding where this Uncommitted campaign and how it's kicking off nationally. I think, one of the things that I think for those of us who are really looking at political independence, one of the things that we always tend to miss the mark on is, what is the section of society that really needs change? And as Santita says, I'm from the Poor People's Campaign. There are 800 people a day dying of poverty in this country. It's the fourth leading cause of death is poverty. And it's actually increasingly, becoming a problem that our rulers cannot control. And so when I first heard about, the Uncommitted movement, I'm thinking, is there a potential candidate that would come out of that movement that could really be a base building so that people would have somewhere to focus on? And it's kind of, obviously for me, it's a little disappointing that wasn't the case. But just this idea of breaking, even at that level, with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, since World War II, has been, one of the leading sort of, has led the working class. I mean, our unity with the Democratic Party, from World War II, but increasingly that hold is becoming a less and less, as Santita was pointing out in the last section, in the last hour. But I don't know that the ruling class has an actual answer to the issues that are going on, because there are just a lot of fundamental shifts that are going on in the economy. You can't really understand a political system if you don't understand the economy upon which that political system is built. And I think from, you living in Michigan now and certainly Chicago, the Midwest, the entire world is in a tremendous upheaval around how profit gets extracted from labor. When you have increasing technology that's permanently displacing labor, it's not temporary. We see the overproduction of glut from the industrial age. It's not that, because even with the heavy hits on all the major industries, including finance, the accounting houses, retail, there's no section of society, including farming, that have not been impacted by the new technology. And so I think the ruling class has a real problem on their hands about how they're going to maintain control. And so whenever we see these things bubbling up, where people get excited. But I do think that this whole idea around organizing among those folks that need change, and that is the poor, the growing poor, those people that are low income, they're the ones that really need the change in society, that we need to have some kind of independent political voice and movement that we can actually unite with, because nothing coming out of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and probably even no labels, I'm going to go ahead and say it, it's worth people really talking about. And the reality of poverty is that we were talking about 140 million plus poor and low income people in this country alone. I mean, that's almost half the population of this country. It's a situation that cannot be ignored, but it's also a situation that cannot be resolved in the current, structure of capitalism. They can't resolve it. And so now we're being, like Santita is saying, the media is going to have to spin a different story. The Democratic Party is going to have to figure out how to reposition itself in order to maintain its control. And, and we see all of these sort of fundamental shifts and arguments and discussions going on with no real resolution.
But
And I
Sheila, but they're losing the control, which is why you have the battle for TikTok. I mean,
exactly.
Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL said, we don't have a Democratic or Republican problem. We've got a TikTok problem. The democratization of the news. And before people go after the ADL and APAC and everything, I get it, because you know what? They are extremely powerful. They figured out the game. They gamed the system. I ain't mad at you. Are you abusing your power? Yes, but okay, I got it. That having been said, they understand how the system works and they've gamed it. What we have to understand is who owns media, how you need to own your own media, support your own media, get your own narrative out. Because if you didn't have a democratized media, we wouldn't know not just about Gaza. And that's an old story. It's like it's going on 100 years, it's more than 75 years old. You would not know a lot of the things that people are now beginning to wake up to, Josh and Sheila. It's because you could just pick up your phone and go, wait a minute, what? What? The young lady who was walking down the street with her cousin and said, she's 17 years of age. She has a 9-year-old cousin. She said, go into the store. Go, no, this is not going well. And I don't want you to see this. At the tender age of 17, she's a child. She pulls out her phone and goes like this. I know they're going to kill this guy. Wow. George Floyd. I don't even know what his name is. I know this is not going to end well. I mean, you see, and the corporate media don't even understand that no one's even watching them anymore. Yeah, we don't Walter Cronkite them anymore. You don't do that. I mean, I'm like, who anchors Lester Holt on NBC, somebody's on ABC, somebody's on CBS? I don't know. Because they're not even in my consciousness anymore. I mean, so the whole game has changed, Joshua.
There are two things I just want to respond positively to what Sheila said in terms of, and reiterate, what the Uncommitted has done and is doing is getting the attention to say, hey, we do not accept the status quo. So that's one. But when I'm talking to you all here, and I think, Sheila, we're on the same page, is talking about, okay, we've got the attention of the world and we've got the attention of those in power. Most importantly, we've got the attention of constituency. How do we physically enact change right now? And through this election cycle, we have that chance. And respectfully, I don't necessarily think it would be at the presidential level, but it is, while we have everyone's intention, it is at the down ballot. So we can get people who are sitting in the local seats who actually care about poverty, care about clean water, that don't want to send our money to Israel and profit off of bombs, but we can invest here. And I think the opportunity is happening over the next several weeks and months leading up to November to actually put a stake in the ground and actually move towards that. In terms of where TikTok fits in and the fact that they're going after TikTok, it's just, again, it's not funny, but it's humorous. That very well put. Listen, yeah, go ahead. It's humor. Yes, go ahead, Sheila. I'm sorry, you're saying.
No, I was just saying it's just ironic, not ironic, and but it's telling.
Yes.
Those formats that allow a level of democratization with what we hear. And there's a lot of stuff that we can get bombarded with, and I agree with Santita. And so that's why what we see, in the movement on the part of the ruling class to try to contain and control those messages that come from TikTok and other places. It's very telling. So there are areas of society that they cannot control, and that's where we are going to have to build. And the one thing that they can't do is they cannot solve poverty. And people are going to fight for what they need. And if we don't have a movement, that's why I think the Poor People's Campaign is so important. If there's not a movement uniting the poor, because there's everything out there that serves to divide us, right? But we have to really understand what is it that we have in common with one another. I'm telling you, like when I'm going down, downstate, and a lot of the people joining the campaign, people thought that it would be Black people because that's the narrative. Black people are fundamentally poor, but the majority of people who've been coming toward the campaign are white and poor. 66% of the 140 million people are white and poor.
But that was something Dr. King talked about. Reverend Jackson's been talking about it. I mean, the fact is, you knew you know that the people hurting in America, out of wedlock teen births are with white girls. I mean, you can paint it black and brown all day long if you want to. It's just not true.
It's not
And
true.
they do have an answer for resolving poverty. It just means that, what did Reverend Otis Moss Jr., not the pastor of Trinity here in Chicago, but his father, who was Dr. King's classmate at Morehouse, said, God will supply your every need, not your every greed. So a few people holding on to everything are going to have to let go of a lot so that the rest of us can get our fair share.
Yeah.
I mean, Dwight McKee, your thoughts? Are we taking Uncommitted seriously enough? And you see, Joshua, they haven't stopped at Minneapolis and Minnesota. Now this is becoming a thing. Will this go through the fall? Josh, what do you think? Oh, hold on, Dwight. Where do you all see this going, Josh?
So again, the Uncommitted will run through the primary season.
Okay.
But again, it will morph from Uncommitted to we have everyone's attention. Now let's make some changes. So that's where it's headed. And that's what I was referring to earlier is
Sure.
I'd like to see us start to change from once we get past the Uncommitted, we will have leverage, and then we can actually invest in our down ballot races to get change there. I don't know if that's the official Uncommitted position, but that's the Joshua Feinstein. That's the Joshua Feinstein position. I don't even know if it's a JPP Action position, but that's the Joshua Feinstein position at this point.
I got you. I'm not mad at you. Dwight McKee?
Well, first, I wouldn't call it the Uncommitted movement. I think that's a mistake. I think I'd call it the more committed movement. Is that this movement is more committed to seeing justice and equality and social good for more people than the conventional parties are. So I don't think they are uncommitted. I think they're more committed. And so
when I met Layla the morning of the first press conference, I said to her, consider me totally committed to the Uncommitted. So I see what you mean, Dwight. Back over to you.
Oh, absolutely. And it's very timely because we need that kind of committed base to make real change. And we need the kind of base that is willing to sacrifice their own advantages to make that kind of change. I understand why the conventional parties are afraid of that movement and the third party movement.
Why?
Because they have much less control over them than they've had historically over conventional people who are involved in politics. And it's an arrogance in that because they assume that if they don't come to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, there's nowhere else to go and there's no other means of expression. Historically, what happens is that if there is a third party or there is a movement with a different perspective, the parties sit down and negotiate with them and make concessions with them and try to draw them in and try to appeal to those different groups based on what their difference is. And even if they have to split the difference, there are concessions on both sides. And they come out a little, a little compromised on each side, but at least the compromise becomes a policy compromise. Now these parties are so arrogant is that they're not even willing to discuss the policy. They just want to overthrow the dissonance. They don't have any discussions with those who disagree with them. They just want to say, we are so powerful that we will run you over before we sit down and negotiate with you. And that's where I think that they're going to have the biggest surprise, is that they're going to pay the big price for that attitude. I think particularly on the Democratic side, is they're going to pay a terrific price for not discussing or compromising or coming to some resolutions on those issues that are moral issues for the more compromised. These are not political issues per se. They are moral issues, and that's why the more committed is so unnegotiable on that side of these issues.
That's right.
So where do you, I mean, project out? Because I will say this, Joshua Feinstein and Sheila Garland, Dwight McKee predicted that we'd be here 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and then 4 years ago. He said, win or lose, Trump is not leaving office. If he loses the Electoral College vote, he will set up a parallel government out of Mar-a-Lago, and he will be back. This is bigger than an election cycle for him, but more than that for his adherents. I think that's what we have to understand. Even Donna Brazile, as establishment as she was on, I think, the ABC Sunday News morning program. She said, what you all need to understand is this is not a campaign, this is a movement. People are in pain out here. And he at this time is the horse that they are riding. But it is even beyond him. But if you continue to beat at the horse that folks are riding, what did you say, Dwight? Why turn a what?
Why turn a monster into a martyr? Which is what they have done.
What do you mean by that? Explain.
Well, now he's a sympathetic figure. Now his base and those in between think him to be unjustly charged with all of these cases, and they see him as being one who has, as he would say, as a victim, because they are afraid that he is trying to bring a resolution to issues for his base, which many of them are poor white people, the people that Sheila's talking about, who are looking for an answer outside of the Republican Party and outside the Democratic Party. And so he plays to that base, who is very, very suspicious of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They actually see both of them as part of the dark state. And so they see him as a resolution, as an answer to both of those parties, which is why he was able to dismantle the traditional Republican Party. And that's why he probably may be able to beat the Democratic Party. And so what has happened by them assaulting him every day is, to his base, they've turned him to a martyr, and he's only gotten more strong. He's only gotten stronger and stronger the more they assault him and try to disable him.
And you know what, Dwight, to your point, Joshua and Sheila, you always have to watch, hey, I've been a commentator on Fox National News for years. Look at where they send their reporters, because they do internal data mining all the time. These folks, news organizations basically do intelligence. They track what you think and how you feel. That's their job. That's what they do. And they're deploying many of their top correspondents to the Black community to ask them, so who do you plan to vote for? Wait a minute, you mean to tell me you don't plan to vote for Biden? And they push back real hard, and the interviewees say, no, I don't. Many of them are going to Trump. Some of them are going to Cornel West. Some are going to RFK. But they said, Biden, no way. And the incredulity of the interviewers is the hubris. I'm like, you're not listening to them. You're not asking them why. You're not asking them what? You're not asking them about their lives. You're just trying to corral them into a spot, and that is not working. And that's why what did you say that the uncommitted campaign should be what?
The more committed campaign.
More committed. That's right. I mean,
I like
because
that.
really, because Joshua, and Sheila, that's what they are. When you're talking about the poor, which there's an allergy to that term, poor and poverty, to those terms in American political discourse. We don't. I have an allergy. It makes my nose run, eyes water. We don't want to talk about that. Even though the poor and the near poor and the functionally poor we're all them. We're a paycheck or two away, for the most part. I mean, that's America. My brother, former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., said, "Look, Americans are the best dressed poor people in the world." Excuse me, your medical bills are going to send you into bankruptcy. Now you can't afford groceries. Now you're talking about Putin, and his election was a foregone conclusion. I didn't even have a choice as a Democrat. You just gave me one guy, and you told me to shut up. How am I supposed to feel about that?
Then that's why I keep on hammering on the idea of we're uncommitted at the top of the ballot, but we're definitely committed at the down ballots, because that's where we can start to take our power back.
So you're looking at the state races, and you're looking at all of these, the unsexy races, if you will.
Yeah, and some of them are a little sexy. There's a couple of sexy Senate races and U.S. House Representative races. I mean, okay. But yes, many of them are kind of dowdy. Yes, but they are where we start to build our power, and there we start to take our state back. When I was listening to you again, and so listen to Sheila and the things you mentioned, I almost see a register in my head, a cash register about how we continue to send money to Israel, and we're at $319 billion. That's what we're at with a B. Imagine what we could have done at home with that. Imagine what we could have done. They have free healthcare there. And here, like you said, if God forbid you get sick, you're essentially saying there's a good chance I'll go into bankruptcy, and not only will it ruin my life, it'll ruin the life of my loved ones and those around me. And again, the way to fight the system here is you gotta, in order to beat them, you gotta join them. We gotta actually win these down ballot races and put in people that represent the real constituents. And when I say down ballots, I'm even talking about from doing the ceasefire resolutions around the state. We go to these city council meetings, and there's people sitting in the seat. And as I'm working with the citizens of a city or county, they have the realization of the person sitting in that seat, they're not, quote, better than me. They're my employee. I elected them. They're not doing a good job. And you know what? Perhaps I should be there because I'll really have the interest at heart of the constituency, and people are waking up to that. And that's where we can begin to take it back. And I'm glad we're doing this at the top of the ticket. And I'm all in on being overly committed or uncommitted, but the answer to it is less sexy. The answer to it is putting our time in and winning these down ballot races over the next couple of weeks and months. I hope that makes sense, or push back on me if I'm oversimplifying.
No. I just wanted to, can I weigh in here, Santita? I wanted to, because I believe that if we don't know the history of the country in which we live, if we don't understand the culture, and if we don't understand the arc of history and what we're working with, we're always kind of fighting a losing battle. I go back to after the Civil War, and I talk about that during the period of Black Reconstruction and some of the things that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote. If you haven't read Black Reconstruction, it should be at the top of your list. So, and I mean, he lays the foundation about this division between Black and white workers and all of that. But there's a part of that history that often gets ignored, which is the fusion movement. And so what I was describing earlier is this kind of historical groundwork that we already have. We understand that the largest transfer of wealth took place after the Civil War, from the very top of society to the very bottom. And the 4 million formerly enslaved and the 5 million whites that lived predominantly in the South benefited from that transfer of wealth. That's the first Reconstruction. But as the Black Reconstruction was being dismantled, one of the things that began to happen was that there were these fusion movements that began to grow up. And most, if you read the history of what happened in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, you begin to see it was white farmers, it was, Black Republicans, it was, the Black farm workers, the sharecroppers. They began to form an alliance. And that was what put a lot of these independent political, like Joshua was saying, these political sort of people in place. And they began to do radical economic and political changes that really changed the course of history for that moment of time. It was the efforts of the ruling class at that time to overthrow Black Reconstruction and to implement Jim Crow. But there were a lot of white folks that resisted, a lot of brown folks, a lot of Black folks, of course, who resisted Jim Crow. But what I'm saying, we have to look at our history to understand what third-party movements look like, what actually was successful. I think at our own peril, not understanding the history of our country, we continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I will go back and I will continue to say this. Since World War II, the Democratic Party is losing its hold on the working class in this country, as witnessed by this committed, uncommitted, and the things that are going on, and just the way that they've been able to rule historically through jobs to, certain sections of the ruling class, and, just the whole role of media and how it plays. I will go all the way back to, 1670, I'm probably getting the year wrong, with the legal creation of the so-called white race. That really kind of set us up. We have this ongoing historical division that keeps us from uniting. And so I'm glad to see these movements that are beginning to, set that aside and really begin to see what we have in common. I will say this, I would highly recommend to your listeners and to those folks on, there's this amazing book that was just released by, I happen to know her name is their name is Cedar Monroe, and the book is called Trash. And if you really want to understand, what white supremacy
Yes, I have that.
means in this country, read their book, Cedar Monroe. And it is, it's an awakening for me as well, because, I'm kind of like dismissing a lot of white folks because I'm thinking that they're unredeemable. But that's not the reality, when you start talking to and uniting among and organizing with poor white workers and poor white folks. Their experiences, you can't negate it. And they're not the ones, I differ. They're not the ones who are supporting Trump. The ones that are supporting Trump, the average income of a Trump supporter is $100,000 a year.
That 2/3 of them make $50,000 a year or more. So people, I'm with you. But you know what? I'm going to tell you, I was in school then. And I was about to go into that, the little interregnum between the end of the spring semester and the beginning of summer school. At Howard, it's a week. So I'm going to call my parents because I was going to go out to California because they were wrapping up the first campaign. And I was going to spend the week with them. And I talked to my father when he was running. Well, it wasn't unusual for me to talk to him every day, because I just would. He'll call me early in the morning or I'll call him late at night, just touching base. But he also wanted to reassure me that he was okay. But my father and I are close, so we talk. And I remember him calling one night. It was close to midnight. And I was like, Dad, because my father doesn't get a lot of sleep. Never did. I said, how are things going? He said, baby, something's going on out here. I said, what do you mean, Daddy? 100,000 people had showed up in Portland to see him. Then when they got to California, the campaign was run by the Chinese and Japanese American community. They were our people out there. You got to Michigan. It was Casey Kasem, who was the most popular DJ of our generation, who had rented a bus without our knowledge. And he went through Michigan and he went through all of the areas in the United States on his weekends off.
Wow.
Organizing the Arab American community, and then he'd go out from there. He used his voice. I'm saying, but we have always been thwarted when we would come together across racial, religious, all the crazy lines that we have amongst ourselves, because there's no difference amongst us at all.
Uh,
And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity now for us
well,
that veiled, right?
well, let me make one correction or one caveat to Sheila's analysis. Is the redistribution of wealth didn't happen during the war. Redistribution of wealth happened because of the war.
Mm.
The DuPonts was just a basic poor family. They were selling gunpowder during the Civil War, and that's how they became rich. The Rothschilds helped fund the war and sell bonds for the war and pass that money to the Morgans. That's how they became rich.
That's interesting.
Rockefeller made his money selling oil during the war. That's how they became rich. The rich get richer because of the wars, and that's why they maintain these wars. And what they do then is they convince us that these wars have something to do with democracy and, the preservation of some great virtue. When the fact of the matter is, they maintain these wars because they make more and more and more money off of these wars. These wars is 50% of what creates this wealth maldistribution.
Mm.
And so what we have to begin to understand in these movements is we have to sweep the myth of patriotism away, which is what hypnotizes these poor white folk and these poor Negroes. They wave the flag, they hypnotize them with that flag and divide us against each other and then send us off to fight in quote unquote, we think the interest of other poor folk. But the fact of the matter is we're fighting so that they can get more contracts and make more and more and more and more money. If you look at the companies that are making the money off of these wars, they're the same companies that sponsor Face the Nation and George Stephanologist, whatever the name is, Stephanopoulos. And these shows that we watch on Sunday, which creates the mythology that these poor people look at to believe, because not only are they sponsored by these war-based companies, in the middle of them is this be all you can are these be all you can be commercials, and in the middle of them are your calling is to become a man and fight for your country and put on a uniform, and then you can really be somebody. And they hypnotize these young kids and get them swept up in that. And so we need to understand the relationship between the maldistribution of wealth and the poverty that we see, and the division that we see between people who believe that they are the patriots because they've been hypnotized by that flag and fighting for people they don't have any of their best interests in heart.
I mean,
We know Smedley Butler wrote the book War is a Racket about 100 years ago. He's one of the most decorated war veterans in our history. At that time, he had been the most decorated. And what he saw of war made him come away and say, this is a racket.
And they went to him and tried to get him to overthrow the government,
Oh, absolutely.
Tried to cut a deal with him for him to take over the government, and he would have been the first Trump. He just refused to do that.
Because even when Trump says we don't need NATO, that was something that Dwight Eisenhower said 70 years ago. He said, if we still have NATO in 10 years, then the experiment did not work and we need to dismantle it. I don't care where the information comes from. I just want the truth, Joshua and Sheila and Dwight. And so, I can't. This is no labels. This really Republicans. I'm not mad at them. It's a cute moniker, but that's who they are. I'm tired of war. I'm tired. I'm tired of poverty. I know all of these are man-made constructs. This is not the world that God made. I know that. So I'm looking for real answers. And I'm looking for us to cease being divided from one another, cease being disconnected, so we can work this out. The answers are there, Sheila. The people who own the Washington Post and the New York Times just don't want us to tell the answers. The people who own these radio stations and television stations, they just don't want you to know. The war is a racket. It's a racket. And people are dying. Oh my gosh. I mean, Ralph Nader said, no, it's not 31,000 Gazans that have killed. That have been killed, it's 200,000. Are you for real? And I trust Ralph Nader more than I trust even what I'm getting from corporate media. This is, and while Jared Kushner is saying this is valuable beachfront property, I'm like, is that what this is about? And getting all the oil and the gas? Wait a minute. And Joshua, he's not the only one. And that's not the only place. You have greedy people all over the world.
Fair
And
enough.
I think this whole idea, I keep saying, that an economic system has its laws, and that the laws have been broken because of the type of technology that's being used to produce abundance, potentially in abundance. But I will say that this whole imperialism, what we call imperialism and colonialism, was the buy-in for the working class of this country in order to have a higher standard of living, right? And so I think I agree with what Dwight is saying, is that we certainly have that legacy in this country. But I think that some of the ties when we see between these institutions that have been brought up in the capitalist system, that they're being unmoored. And so in the middle of that kind of turmoil and the unmooring and all of that, people develop a level of consciousness. And when you see these various movements, like how do we begin to get together and see what is that fundamental thing that's going to move us from point A to point B? And I think there are a couple. One, we have to know the history of our country. Without knowing the history and the culture of our country, we're never going to figure out how to do this thing, number one. I think number two, what is the thing that's fundamentally different and change that is causing this political upheaval? And it's in the economy. And if we don't make that connection, then we're constantly, kind of chasing after, what we need to do in order to fundamentally change. And I think the other thing is that we don't really have a sense of our own political independence because, as we've been saying in the two shows, we're so tied to the Democratic Party and the two-party system that we don't really see our role in that. And I think we have a lot of kind of history bad history to unlearn, but I think the real history is there. And I'm telling you, another source that I would highly encourage people, if you want to know what our rulers are thinking, read the Council on Foreign Affairs, read the Journal on Foreign Affairs, read their literature. You will know what their strategies are and what they're thinking. I am of the belief that the Democratic Convention is not a foregone conclusion that Biden is going to be the candidate. They may have to shift, and I don't know.
Then they will. If they need
to.
Because you see in the Washington Post, someone just called for Kamala to get off the ticket. So,
yeah, I mean,
right, it's all fluid.
It's all fluid. We don't know what exactly, but I do think that these movements, like the Uncommitted and the candidates that are running independent, they're pushing and testing the systems as it exists, so that we can begin to. But if we don't begin to see what is the fundamental, it's poverty. Just like we had to overthrow slavery, we have to overthrow poverty. That is the fundamental thing that we have to do. And there are people who are impoverished that are willing to fight to overthrow poverty, much as there were people in slavery who needed to fight to overthrow slavery. If we don't get that fundamental thing, we're constantly in all our little separate silos. And that's why I keep saying this. I think the Poor People's Campaign is one of the most important campaigns that's out there. We're talking about a multiple statewide campaign that runs national coordinated, actions. And, we're lifting the alarm around poverty, but more than that, connecting our base. Here in Chicago, we're looking at the 33rd, the 35th, the 26th, We have a number of wards here in Chicago who are really striking out and being independent and focused on actually door knocking and talking to their base. That is the poor and the impacted folks that live in the city of Chicago. That's how we ended up with a Brandon Johnson for mayor. That's how we ended up with, a number of state and congressional representatives out of Chicago. It was that understanding that it's not about building up the Democratic Party, but it's about connecting to our base and building a movement. And, like I said, without understanding our history, we're constantly repeating the same.
I think
Yeah, but to your point,
we also have
to your-
we have to, because I've got to close out, Dwight.
Let me just-
No, just because I have 1 minute. We have to understand our history, and we need to understand that the movements don't end. They continue. The struggle continues. The Poor People's Campaign of today is Resurrection City in 1968. But it's also what Operation Push, Urban League, all these organizations have been doing the same thing. If we can acknowledge that and really come together and make a decision, the answers are there.
But to her point, if I said real quickly,
Dwight, we're going off the air right now. But
let me say it to her.
No, let you do it on the other side, because they're going
to.
All right. Yep. That's what I'm trying to say. Sheila Garland, Poor People's Campaign of Illinois. Joshua Feinstein, Jewish Voice for Peace Action, Michigan. You're going to be back on next week as we talk about this national uncommitted campaign. Dwight McKee, the Ma'afa Redemption Project. I am Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Sending everybody much love today. God bless you. And see you next week. No, this weekend on Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. God bless you. Bye-bye.